All right, looks like we are live. We'll give it just a couple seconds for any stragglers to jump on. But those of you that have logged on, thanks so much for joining us today. We will get started here in just a bit. And thank you for being here today.
You're welcome. No problem.
Give it just a little bit more. And those of you watching, please, if you can't hear us, we are playing around with a lav mic today, very informal. So if the volume's not good, please let us know in the comments, and we will adjust as we can. All right, well, I've got just one after two, so we're going to go ahead and get started. I am Jenny Arrieta with the American Red Cross, and welcome Facebook. Welcome to our live. Thank you all for logging in today. This is our first Facebook Live, at least within recent memory, so very glad you're here and hoping this will be the first of many more to come. You may notice we have a little bit of a different background. We are not in a Red Cross office, and we're also not calling in remotely from our homes, as we've all been doing for the last couple of years. We are in the Red Cross warehouse in Alameda. Alameda is a small island between San Francisco and Oakland, and this is where we have all of our disaster supplies stored. So it's an important place, and we figured it would be the perfect place to come and talk about preparedness today. So very excited to do that, and want to go ahead and introduce and welcome our special guests. We have with us our Regional Disaster Officer, John Ruiz. Thanks so much for being here, John.
Thank you for having me. I'm very excited about this.
Yeah, great. Have you ever done a Facebook Live before?
I have not. It's my first one.
Same here. Learning experience all around. All right. Good deal. So preparedness is the theme today. Basically how folks can prepare for disasters. We talk about that an awful lot at the Red Cross. But we also want to talk a little bit about how the Red Cross prepares for disasters, which is something maybe we touched a little less on, but every bit is important. So get things started. John, I've got a list of questions here, but folks, if you have questions as well, please put them in the comments and we will get to them as we can. So let's get going. Let's talk a little bit about you first, as long as we've got you here.
Sure.
Tell us about you and your role with the Red Cross. How long have you been doing this?
Yeah, so I've been with the Red Cross since 2005. I started as a disaster program manager in San Francisco, promoted up to Deputy Director of Disaster Services, took a job as the liaison with FEMA for the Red Cross for a couple years, and then I left for 3 years and then returned into this position in 2016. Currently, I'm the Regional Disaster Officer, which oversees the Disaster Cycle Services Program for our Northern California coastal region, which means disaster readiness, response, recovery, and preparedness parts of the disaster cycle.
Wow, so you wear a lot of different hats and a lot of different disaster hats.
We do, yes.
Yeah, that's great. No, that's important work. And as I mentioned at the top of this live, we talk a lot about preparedness with the Red Cross. We mostly focus on how folks can get prepared at home, prepare their whole families, maybe have something ready to go in their car, at their workplace. But we want to focus today on what the Red Cross does to prepare for disasters. So what are some of the key ways the Red Cross prepares for disasters? I know we have, wildfire season, but we also have major disasters that just kind of happen anytime. That's sort of the one constant, is that disasters can and do happen anytime. So what are some things the Red Cross does day in and day out, behind the scenes, up front and in person, to prepare for disasters?
Sure. Yeah, like you said, we have sort of this dual response role. One is day-to-day. We have, on average, 2 to 3 home fires somewhere in our region every single day. So apartment or home catches fire and we respond. So we're ready for that 24/7, 365. But we also have to be ready for the bigger disasters. And for us, that's a wildfire, which seems to happen every year.
Oh, yeah.
So when we talk about our readiness, what we're looking at are sort of 4 different areas. One is our people. So we're constantly looking for new volunteers who want to come on and get trained to help with those home fires and then get additional training to be ready for the larger disasters. We're also providing additional advanced training so that our current responders who are in the shelters when the big fires happen can promote up. So we give them those opportunities to become managers, and then what we call chiefs, which are people who are in charge of larger groups of workers during those big disasters. So we really look at how do we build our capacity across every level and make sure that we have the leadership in place locally to respond to disasters that happen in our region, and then, if necessary, deploy them outside of our region when disasters happen in other states or other parts of the state. So we definitely invest a lot of time in our people. We invest a lot of time in our partnerships. So we work with our local government partners, the city, county, and even state and federal level, to make sure we're setting clear expectations of what we can do, what our capacity is, where our strengths are, and where we might be a little weak. For example, it's very difficult for us to get a lot of health services or mental health professionals to volunteer, so we're always looking for volunteers in those professions to come to us. But when we don't have enough, we have to make sure our partners understand that so that they can supplement with their own public health or public mental health personnel as well.
Sure.
We're working with churches and other nonprofits to make sure we have the partnerships that we need so we can have a whole community response. The Red Cross is only a part of it. We're a big part of it, but we can't do everything. So we really rely on our partners to provide feeding support, pet support, other things. So a lot of time during the year, we're building those relationships, maintaining those relationships, and finding new ones. We also spend a lot of time on our stuff, right? So our readiness for stuff. So we have shelter trailers that are all over the place, strategically placed across our 15 counties. We have this warehouse with a plethora of response material, right? And so we're always doing inventory and make sure we have the right levels of that. And so we're just making sure we have what we need to initiate and maintain for a couple days of disaster, strategically where we need it, when we need it. So that's a big part of what we do throughout the year. And then finally, it's planning, right? The fourth piece is just making sure that we have a game plan. How are we going to work together? And fortunately and unfortunately, we've had a lot of experience with that over the past few years. And so we know what it takes to initiate a large response to wildfire. We're constantly learning from that, doing after action reviews, implementing those, trying to get better. And that's the one of all the things, one of our biggest strengths is our capacity to learn and get better each time. And our team always wants to do that. So we're always looking at plans, exercises, ways that we can learn from each other, learn from our experiences to get better. So those are the 4 ways that we, throughout the year, we're trying to make sure we're ready for the disasters that happen.
Wow, those are a lot of moving parts. 4 pillars of disaster preparedness, for sure. You mentioned disaster health services. I wanted to give a shout out to one of our very own regional volunteers this morning, Liz Dietz. Posted a photo on her Facebook, I believe from like 3 in the morning at SFO Airport. She was deploying for disaster health services to Kentucky to help with the flood response there. So thank you so much, Liz. If anyone tuning in is interested in becoming a volunteer, as John said, we are always looking for volunteers. And it sounds like there are plenty of opportunities for more training and hands-on experience. So redcross.org/volunteer is a great starting place to get involved, and we hope you do if you're interested. You mentioned shelters. That's a big piece of the Red Cross response puzzle when a disaster happens, and we're very good at it. But we know it's not as simple as just getting folks together, getting supplies together, and poof, a shelter appears. Can you talk a little bit about perhaps the early stages of a Red Cross shelter, and that is, how does the Red Cross determine those shelter locations? What goes into that?
Yeah, so it's a mix of different things. Part of it is knowing which shelters we've opened in the past. So unfortunately, in areas like Sonoma and Napa, in parts of Santa Cruz and Monterey, we tend to have fires almost every year. And so there are a number of shelter facilities where we know the county or the city is going to want to open. And so we see those as our primary shelter locations. Yeah. We have them mapped out. We've assessed them. We understand the square footage. We know where to put things. We may even have pre-placed material at the site, so we can have shelter trailers or Connex boxes or something where we can maintain some material there. Because we know we're going to need them year over year. Yeah. And then we have other shelter locations that are out in the community. So it could be a church with a large rec room. It could be a school when school's out. It could be a community center that the city owns. And those we use also for those large apartment fires. So if we have, 30 or 40 apartments that get lost in an apartment fire, we open a shelter for that. Not quite as dramatic as the wildfires, but still a lot of need.
Absolutely.
So we need shelters locally within our communities where we can open those. And so we maintain those relationships by every couple of years going and assessing those, making sure we understand how big it is, if there's anything that's changed in terms of its accessibility, just so we know what it has and doesn't have, so we can bring in ramps if we need to, or showers or toilets, whatever. So we try and maintain that for all our shelters, but as we get closer to fire season in the late winter, early spring, we're really focusing a lot on our primary shelter locations to make sure we're ready, we understand what's there, so that when we do need to open a shelter for a wildfire, we have what we need or know what we need to bring in. So we work with our partners, our local governments, to make sure we know which of those locations they are.
I know the Red Cross does several shelter practice setups. Do we loop our partners in for that? So it's kind of everybody on deck so they know what it's going to be like when an actual disaster happens?
Absolutely, yeah. We can't do it alone. Even when we're at full strength, which we're often not because people are deploying all over the place and we're responding to fires outside of our region, we need help. And so if you look at the initiation of a shelter operation, it's the local volunteers first, and then we supplement with responders from the rest of our region. And that takes time. So if we need more than a couple shelters in a community at once, we're going to need our partners. And so we try to proactively provide shelter training to city or county employees so they can help out. And then we try to work with nonprofits such as the Community Emergency Response Teams, or CERTs. We train them. We look for other organizations that are willing to train their volunteers or their staff so they can help us open shelters when needed. Absolutely, we can't do it alone. We need our partners. We have a pretty large strength within our region, but it's not everywhere all the time. And so we really rely on our partners. We do the training with them so that they understand. So we'll do shelter trainings with our local government partners from time to time. Unfortunately for us, for the past few years, we generally open a shelter almost in every one of our counties due to wildfires or apartment fires. It's been so we get a lot of that practice. But when we don't, we will work with our partners to just make sure we're exercising, making sure we know how to do it, and then we're working out all the kinks to make sure we're not pulling a trailer with a flat tire. So
my gosh,
a lot of that we have to get done before fire season.
All those things to think about. No, that's great. So when thinking about setting up a shelter, we're here in this cavernous warehouse. There is all kinds of stuff all around us. What supplies are actually needed or have to be taken into account when, say, responding to a large wildfire? And so not just the shelter supplies, but what else does the Red Cross need to have in mind and make sure they've got adequate stockpiles of in order to successfully respond to a wildfire?
Yeah, so our primary items are cots, right? Both what we call military cots, or the basic cots. We also have cots for people who may be medically more fragile, so something a little more comfortable. We have bariatric cots as well. So we have a couple different types of cots in varying quantities. We have blankets, and then we have what we call comfort kits, so little packages that have toothbrushes and a comb, deodorant, things that people may have left home without, just to make sure they feel more comfortable in the shelter. Then we have things like tarps to put down on floors so we don't ruin a gymnasium floor, which we've done in the past. We'll have wheelchairs, we have walkers, we have some minimal ADA material to help out. We'll have coffee pots, toilet paper in case the facility doesn't have it, paper towels, a lot of other things. And so we have a pretty well-established inventory in each of our shelter trailers that we maintain every year. We re-inventory before fire season to make sure we have what we need. And so our shelter trailers are really the first tip of the spear we roll when we open a shelter. And then if we need more and more of those, either we'll pull some from other counties, or we'll come here to the warehouse where we have large quantities of cots and blankets and comfort kits ready to go in pallets. We load those on our truck and we send those out. But all of that is part of it. We also need the registration forms, the medical forms. Our health services nurses need their boxes. And so there's quite a lot. But really what we look at is what do we essentially need for the first half a day to open the shelter, get it open. We don't want to delay that when it's an emergency. Make sure we have all that ready to go. And then everything else we either bring from our warehouse or we'll go buy in the community. If we need ice chests or if we need more snacks, we can go get that in the community. But we want to have everything we need for the first 12 to 24 hours, either in our shelter trailers or here at our warehouse that we can roll to where it's needed.
Oh, that's great. Have everything pre-positioned and ready to go. So the initial response to something like a wildfire obviously is very important. There are a lot of unknowns. The fire is very dangerous. You've got a lot of personnel working on it. I wonder, does disaster recovery, does the recovery end of a DR, of a disaster response, factor into all this shelter and disaster response preparation?
Yeah, it's very challenging when you're trying to open shelters to look ahead. But we try to always be looking forward and anticipating what's next. So as we're opening shelters, we do try and start finding and requesting responders who can do recovery. We need to know the scope of the disaster, the damage, before we can start providing financial assistance or other types of assistance for recovery. But we can't wait until we hit that point. We have to have the people either in place or ready to come in place and all the material needed before that. So we try and bring in recovery workers, or we'll shift shelter workers who no longer are needed and get them pre-trained to be recovery workers. But yeah, absolutely, the response to open a shelter is the first step. Once we get everyone comfortable and they have a safe, secure, warm place to stay, then we look at how do we get them on the road to recovery? How do we get them whatever they might need, whether it's a little bit of financial assistance or a connection with transportation or communication to talk to family members so that they can move somewhere else. All that we look to bring in. So we'll partner with Verizon or AT&T to bring in cell phones to our shelters to make sure we have enough of that. Or we'll work with local partners on transportation costs, or Uber to help us with Uber passes or something to help people get to where they need to be. So we're trying to bring all those resources to bear so that we can help people begin that recovery process and get them to a place outside the shelter. I mean, we try to make our shelters as comfortable as possible, but they're still not where we want people to be. We want them to start there and then move on to something more, more comfortable, and that's part of their recovery. So absolutely, as soon as shelters are opening, we're looking at how do we get our people in place so we can start the recovery process as quickly as possible.
What about things like wildfire cleanup kits or the meal distribution that we do at times? Is that all factored in as well?
It is, yes. So when we're opening a shelter, right away we're looking at, do we have snacks? Do we have the next meal ready? And a lot of times when we're opening a shelter, we just go to the local vendors. We'll go to Pizza Hut or whatever's nearby because it's quicker. As the disaster grows, we'll start bringing in our national partners, World Central Kitchen, the Baptist, Salvation Army, and they'll start setting up field kitchens and start producing thousands of meals. We'll start running a distribution system to all of our shelters and all the other sites. So that takes a couple of days to ramp up. So before then, we look at partnerships we've established with national chains or local restaurants or vendors to sort of fill the gap. But absolutely, feeding is a big part of it. Support for pets is a big part of it. Again, as we open up shelters, we're looking at what's next, making sure we have the meals, and then are we supporting the pets? Do we have showers and toilets in place? Do we have everything else we need? And it's as soon as you do one thing, you're already thinking about the next thing and moving forward.
Absolutely. So you just you mentioned a very pertinent topic that comes up pretty much at every disaster, and that's pets. Pets are family members too. Yeah. Goodness knows mine are. So that's a relevant question, is how does the Red Cross prepare to accommodate pets? So how do you go about finding an animal partner or find ways to accommodate pets in or near shelters? How does that go into play?
So the Red Cross has recently, within the past couple months, really embraced the concept of having pets in shelters. Before, it was only service animals. Our region has been pretty lax with that, and we've had pets in our shelters for a while just because of the community that we represent. We couldn't say no. But the national organization has really embraced that now. We are looking at how do we provide support to pets in shelters, either co-located nearby or maybe in the same facility but not where we sleep or eat, or where children are playing, or where we have health service workers working with people. Outside of those areas, we are now allowing pets in shelters. So what we do is we work with the national partners, PetSmart and others, and then we have a lot of local partners. So if you look at every one of our counties, most of them have a pretty substantial pet support network, either a government agency or nonprofit, that we try and work with ahead of time because we know people are going to bring their pets. They need to. And we want to be able to support them. So we've been doing that pretty well for the past few years because we know it's a critical part of people's evacuation is that they got to bring their pets. So we want to be ready for that. But the key thing here is the people have to be ready. They have to have what they need as they're preparing their go kit. Have a kit for their dog or cat, or cats or dogs. Make sure they have the bowls, a leash, if they can, some food to bring with them. So we'll allow them in. We'll put some structure to that, but we don't have crates or dog food ready to go. That's one of the easiest things to get. You put out a word that we need dog food, and we'll have more dog food than we need at a shelter, no problem.
Yes.
But people need to bring their medicines for their dogs or cats or whatever else they need. They really got to be prepared to bring that. And then we'll provide the support at the shelter to make sure those pets are as comfortable as possible.
Yeah. I am so glad you mentioned that. Make your pets part of your preparedness at home. They are part of your family. They're part of your household. So yeah, making your go bag, make one for your pets. That is such a good point. I'm really glad you mentioned that. You've mentioned partners quite a bit today, and I wondered, both national, government, nonprofit, or just local commercial partners, say like PetSmart, a national commercial partner, but how does the Red Cross, and we'll say here within our region, if we are in need of a new partner, let's say for whatever reason we need a new feeding partner for a shelter or for a disaster, how does the Red Cross go about finding and securing that partnership?
Yeah, we'll do research to see who's around. Oftentimes, what you see is when you have a disaster, people want to help. And that's the most amazing thing that happens when a disaster occurs, is the community comes together, and we really try to embrace that and allow them to help, because they need to help. And they want to be able to help their neighbors, and we want to let them. So we embrace that. And sometimes we'll see some partners that we hadn't expected come about. And then after the disaster, we'll follow up with them and say, can we formalize this? What's your capacity to provide that food? Can you do more? What do you need? How much would it cost? And we try and organize that a little bit better so that it's not just at the spur of the moment. Hopefully we try and make it a little bit more of a planned effort. And then people come to us in steady state. An example, not around feeding, but the Bay Area Air Quality Management Board came to us and said, we have all these air filters that we want, that we have available through a grant. Can we give them to you to deploy to shelters in fire season, because it's smoky and it's bad air? Absolutely. So we signed an agreement. We have 25 units here that we can ship out to our shelters when needed. And they brought it to us. There's a lot of times these partnerships in feeding in other areas from our community, government, nonprofit partners come to us because they want to help. It helps if we know ahead of time so we can organize and make sure we're clear on expectations. But absolutely, it's a whole community response, and that's something that we take very, very seriously, and we're always looking for new partners to help us respond within our region.
That's fantastic. I love that we got those air purifiers. I saw them coming in. Yeah. So we've talked a lot about the things that the Red Cross does, it sounds like year-round, to make sure that we are always at the ready and can deploy at a moment's notice to help people in need. What are, and I'm sure there are, what are some common challenges that you run into during any part of the preparedness process, whether it's, getting, supplies shipped in? I know there's been issues with production. I know gas prices have been high recently. Just what are some common challenges that may impede or just maybe slow down the process that you guys have to deal with and maybe have found solutions to working around?
Yeah, I feel like we have a pretty good supply chain. So the Red Cross has, been proactive in securing what we need ahead of time, and we have a pretty substantial supply here. I think the biggest challenge is getting what we need, where we need it, when we need it. And that's a game of whack-a-mole, right? Yeah. We've had big fires in Sonoma. We could very easily have a big fire in another county that we weren't expecting it. So it's always about trying to assess risk and placing what we need where we need it. The other piece that's really challenging is how much do we need, right? We could need millions of cots for an earthquake. There's no way we could store that much. So how much do we need to store to initiate a response where we know the national organization can bring in a lot more within a couple days? So it's trying to hit that sweet spot about how much we absolutely need immediately, so we're not running into supply chain issues, but not having too much. And then where does it go? How much do we put in the field versus how much do we keep in the warehouse? And trying to find that balance. It's never perfect, but we do try and work with our partners and with our local volunteers who know their community best to help us figure that out. But beyond that, there's always the need for more, and sometimes it doesn't come up until the disaster happens, and that's when we rely on our social media and our communications team to help get the word out on what we need and find those partners who can help us. But I think the key is for our community partners to know we don't need everything that you may have when you want to give it to us. And sometimes we may not need clothes, and sometimes we might. And just to be understanding that if we don't need clothes, it's better not to bring it to the shelter because it causes a lot of issues.
Yeah.
So it's a challenge because people want to help and they want to help in their own way. But I think really trusting us to be open about what we need when we need it. And that's when we really rely on the community to come together and provide that for us. Because if we're asking for it, we really need it. And it's something we can't do ahead of time. So that's some of the biggest challenges we have.
Outstanding. No. And that's a really good point, that needs can change rapidly and they can be very specific throughout a disaster. So it's important to keep that in mind. Appreciate that. Finally, if the public wants to help the Red Cross prepare before a disaster, how can they help?
I think the key for everyone is to have your go kit, right? Be ready to evacuate when needed. Make sure you have what you need for yourself and your family and your pets. That's critical. The second is listen to the government, the warnings. If they're telling you to prepare to evacuate, get ready to evacuate. And if the word comes to evacuate, please evacuate, right? We need you to leave. It's dangerous to keep people in place. So just sort of being aware and being prepared to leave when needed. But other than that, if people are willing to volunteer with us, we're always looking for volunteers. It is a very rewarding opportunity to help your community and to really feel like you're helping out and fulfilling a part when people are at their lowest. It's pretty amazing, and just giving someone a hug can really make a difference. And Red Crossers are huggers, so that's helpful. So volunteering and then donating. Honestly, if you don't have the time, you don't have the capacity. I know a lot of people are reluctant to donate to the Red Cross, but we do a great work. Our whole focus is on helping people prepare for disasters. And so if you could donate to the Red Cross before a disaster or during a disaster, that would be much appreciated.
Fantastic. Yes. And again, we'll reiterate, the Red Cross is a volunteer organization. We are always looking for new volunteers. And as John explained here, there are plenty of opportunities for help during a disaster. And it sounds like one volunteer can actually be involved in multiple facets of a disaster. So the response, the recovery, there's a lot to do. And that all takes quite a bit of manpower, time, and money. There are a lot of ways to get involved. The best place to start, redcross.org/volunteer. And then we want to reiterate that preparation at home is every bit as important. You can never be too prepared for a disaster, especially out here on the West Coast where we run to the risk of earthquakes, wildfires, in addition to everyday disasters that happen all over the country. So redcross.org/prepare is a great resource to get started on that. Make that kit, get prepared, and stay informed. And now I'm going to ask our moderator, do we have any questions? Those of you that have tuned in, any questions you want to ask of me and John today, go ahead and put them in the chat. We'd love to hear from you. Otherwise, we hope this has been helpful, and we're hoping that this will be one of many Red Cross Facebook Lives that we'll do. It looks like we don't have any questions, so John, I want to thank you for your time.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Appreciate you being here. We know you and your team stay busy year-round, so we appreciate all that you do for our region and for the nation as a whole and the Red Cross. I want to shout out our awesome cameraman, Martine Gagliano, our public affairs manager, our moderator online, Carrie Dighton, our comms director, who is joining us remotely from Alaska. Thank you for tuning in. And a big shout out to everyone who tuned in today. This is our very first Facebook Live for the Red Cross Northern California Coastal Region. So hopefully there will be many more to come. In the meantime, again, redcross.org/prepare. Get prepared today. I'm Jenny Arrieta with the American Red Cross. Thanks so much, and bye.